right, Tony, thank you for joining us here today in the JumpSearch Talent Show. It's a real honor to have you here, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. You and I spoke a few weeks ago where we first met, and I was really impressed with obviously your HR experience, but also your entrepreneurship experience and your how do you say your vision for where all this is going, right? I, like many others, probably in our audience, are trying to figure out which way is up in this shifting landscape here. So maybe you can shed a little light on kind of what you're seeing. So for the folks joining us here today, I have Tony Deblauwe. Is that pronounced
That's
correctly?
correct, yeah.
You got it right. Tony, thanks for joining us here. Tony is a global HR leader and entrepreneur. He has deep expertise in transforming cultures, scaling HR strategies, and he's worked with companies including Celigo, Symphony, Citrix. He lives in the Bay Area. Is that right?
Yes.
And he's right in the mix of a lot of things that are going on right now with respect to entrepreneurship, the future of work, HR, AI. And so I'm really excited to get in your brain, Tony, and really figure out what you think is going on out there and how we might position ourselves for success. So welcome, Tony.
Great. Well, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. So I guess let me put some context around all of those experiences and things. Starting with HR wasn't my career choice. I never had intended to go down the path of HR. I thought I was going to be a genetic engineer. I was really more into that, but still the problem solving, still trying to figure things out. How do we make things work or different? I was really interested in that side of, the human experience, if you will, like at that very, very basic level. But as fate would have it, I ended up doing a small contracting stint in a startup pharmaceutical company. And it was through that experience that I had a good supervisor who said, maybe recruiting is what might be better for you, because I was talking to him about like, oh my gosh, everybody here's got a master's or two masters or a PhD. And like, what am I doing? Because I had turned down a master's PhD program because I thought, I don't know if I'm ready to keep going into school. I need to work for a bit, right? So I was feeling all of that heaviness of, did I make a mistake? And so he told me about that. And that's kind of how it started. I got into technical recruiting and for biotechnology companies. So I learned a lot about that space, and then that grew into semiconductor, and then that grew into SaaS and other types of things. And so that was really the beginning of the journey. And then when I took my first full-time job, which was a half generalist, half recruiter, I was really feeling, I don't want to say deprived, about how the tools worked for me as a recruiter. It was early SAP. And if anybody on the audience knows early SAP, it is not the interface that you use today. It's very different. So I was losing a lot of time, basically. And this is when, broadband and things weren't quite there. People were still using modems. But I thought, I bet you I could stitch something together, an applicant tracking system that can work for my needs. So that's what I did. And I put some mock-ups together. I had the director of IT help me with some of the programming side of it. And I created, in the midst of all of this, my own ATS. And this was a big enterprise company. And so they weren't necessarily pleased that I went off and roguely created this thing. But it was so much faster, and it was web enabled, and I could get feedback from hiring managers immediately, right? So that was a good foundation for a couple of reasons. One, that I was growing in my career, which was great. But the second thing was, even in environments where it didn't seem possible, you could be scrappy and build something that was of use. So that always stuck with me. And so as I advanced, eventually I got out of the enterprise space and started moving into startup and bigger and more roles, understanding how a company evolves. And that started to put additional pressures on me to say like, well, how do you handle all of these things? But as I was going, I was finding new challenges. Compensation software is terrible. Employee development software is terrible, right? Like all the focus was really on payroll, benefits, and so on. So I always had this thing in the back of my mind that when you look at the end-to-end HR technology stack, a lot of it is front-loaded to the front, which I get it, hire the best people. We have fewer problems later. And then all of the table stakes HR, right? Benefits, payroll, that kind of stuff. But all the things that I ended up having to build, manager development program, high potential programs, like where are the tools for that?
Yeah.
And as everybody knows, the HR tech stack is out of control. I have an HRIS, maybe that's payroll, maybe it's not. I got an ATS, maybe the performance system is in the HRIS, maybe it's not, maybe it's here, there. So the next thing you know, you've got 4 or 5 different systems. None of them talk to each other. But yet, when you start to get into organizational development and HR business partner type roles, you need all of those things to talk together to get the data that then drives what you're doing, measures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I've long struggled with that. And I always had in the back of my mind, what's my next ATS? Like, what's my next thing? So I didn't do much. I built a mobile app that was for coaching, because that was one of the things that HR managers came to me and said, tell me how to say it. Tell me how to say this if I'm letting someone go. Tell me what to say. It was always the tell me what to say. So very partnering. And so then here we are, fast forward, AI fills in all the gaps that I've had over those years.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why I'm very excited in this next stage of my journey to play with those tools and shore up all of those gaps that I had to, scrappily put together over the years.
Yeah, no, that's a great intro, Tony. So when you think about traditionally what HR meant to most people and to organizations, how would you describe that, and how would you contrast that to what it's evolving to? May not be there yet, but what it's evolving to with respect to just that evolution, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I think it's a kind of a mixed bag. One of the sort of inside jokes with HR is we always seem to want to change our titles and our names to try to feel more businessy. Like that whole, and sometimes people still talk about that whole seat at the table thing. Well, we were personnel, then it was human resources, then it was human capital management. Now people want to call themselves people operation. The challenge is that what does a business actually measure and want as impact from HR? And some people think it's just simply what I call the block and tackle table stakes, what's typically under the umbrella of HR ops. As long as I get my paycheck, benefits, like people are onboarded correct, like that kind of very tactical operational thing, HR is doing a pretty good job, or they do employee relations, or they keep us out of legal trouble, et cetera. And of course, that's important. Compliance and all of those things are super, super important, but the impact to the business isn't going to come from that. It's going to come from all of the other roles that are involved with coaching, partnering, organizational workforce planning, those types of things. So I think most people have a view, HR, even leadership roles are like the end role that they hire. It's never at the beginning. Like they would never, I shouldn't say never, but in most cases, most examples, they're not hiring the CPO before the CFO or the COO or whatever. It almost becomes, again, it's an afterthought as opposed to, no, you need to treat it as critically in the beginning, if it's done correctly, to set the right foundations forward. Or, which is still a common thing, you see heads of HR tucked under other roles. Oh, well, we'll just have you report to the COO. We'll have you report to the CFO. It's not seen as that standalone leader that is as important, as critical as the product, finance, or all those things. And I don't know if that's ever going to go away or that we've made tons of progress there, because certainly that's still the case. But what I think has changed in all of that evolution is the expectations of HR in terms of the connective tissue to the business is becoming much, much more critical. We talk about, oh, they have to have business acumen. Well, obviously, but what does that actually mean? It means that if I launch a program, it has to have a direct impact that somehow, sometimes intangibly, help to create a momentum by which we have the right set of performance execution done. The delivery is done. So now with the technology changing, I feel like there's going to be more pressure on HR leaders, HR in general, to be more effective and efficient with the tools that they have to create those experiences, to create those performance deliverables. And I think that's an exciting chance for HR folks anywhere in the stack, recruiting, anything, to be part of that, defining that next journey.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier that there's a lot of different sort of platform tools, and it feels a little bit fragmented. But now, as the technology is evolving, to be specific, the sort of generative AI, machine learning technologies evolving, it feels like this rising tide. How do you see that affecting sort of this fragmented platform and maybe fragmented. It feels like this fragmented platform set of platforms or tools is leading to a fragmented view of the employer, of the employee or the team member. Do you suspect that as this technology evolves and becomes more integrated, that there'll be a consolidation of these tool sets?
For sure.
Yeah.
That's just, I think that that's just natural evolution. So you're going to see probably bigger companies purchasing, other smaller companies that have already built out, let's say, their AI side,
Hmm.
because some of these companies just can't move fast enough. So it's better for them to buy than to build natively.
Yeah.
So there's going to be that. The challenge, I think, that comes with that consolidation is, people will look at big systems, say Workday. Well, you don't know, depending on the company, Workday's roadmap for AI may not align with what you'd want as the best features, right? So, you may still have to bolt on some things in the meantime to get the AI piece to work.
Hmm.
One thing that I think a lot of people forget to do, because, AI can be that shiny, what I call the shiny bauble, that everybody goes chasing, but they chase without a plan. They chase without a strategy. I can make AI make the performance of a workflow poor, just like you have now, because I didn't plan it right. AI can do a lot of things, but you plug it like any technology into a bad plan and no strategy just for the sake of it, it's not going to give you what you want. So you have to do it smartly. And what I see a lot of people do before is they don't map out what they have. And then they don't map out the user experience. And all those things that we see other business departments do, right? What is the user experience? If you're trying to say, I want to define the North Star of our employee experience, and part of the way we're going to do that is through better managed workflows, better access to data, et cetera, that AI can help us with, either as a bot or as an agent. Well, that's a fair amount of work. Like, you have to really be willing to shake the tree and say, okay, how is this plan going to work and evolve and be maintained over time, versus a great sales pitch that says, I can do all these things and it can fill all these gaps of your legacy
Yeah.
tools. And then you get into implementation, it's nowhere near that.
Yeah.
And I would add, you have to change the profile of people on your team. So you asked about the evolution of HR. Well, are the same profiles and skill sets and job roles going to be what I need? For instance, do I take a business data analyst who's used to calculating ARR and churn and those things, and I put that person in HR? Now, you might say, well, that's an HRIS analyst. Maybe, but it could also mean I need somebody who has that business piece, very technical piece, to actually help build the right workflow and manage the AI that we're putting in place. A lot of folks don't necessarily see that right away, or they think, oh, well, the generalist will do that. Oh, the specialist will do that. Maybe, maybe not. Again, we have to think about the implication on that as well.
Yeah. As far as like how, I guess, what are you most excited about with respect to the possibilities in that consolidation of these siloed, or not siloed, but like these fragmented tools? As things start to consolidate more, like what are you most excited about in terms of the possibilities that are the possibilities or promises that you feel are most realistic in
Sure.
them being realized?
For me, it's the leveraging of all of the data. So when you take a look at signal patterns, right? So oftentimes a lot of this work with talent insights is done in spreadsheets because you are downloading it from all these tools, right? And they're disparate tools. And it's a combination of known data like performance ratings and things, but it's also unstructured. It could be peer feedback. So I'm excited that things start to come together where I can look across all of that data, and the image that I have in my mind, which is, again, it's real, it's a reality now. This isn't 5 years out. It's today. It can be done, and that is a method that takes all of the data from these systems, and because we all know there's going to be contracts and things, like, it's not going to go away right away. But I can at least extract all of that data into what we call a data warehouse. And if people are familiar with Snowflake or Pinecone, it's something like that that organizes and indexes that information. A lot of AI bots, that tends to be how they do it. But now I can put an agent with a pre-described workflow pointing at all of that data. So now when I have an employee, I have everything about them, right? Their JD, their resume, feedback, performance review, all that would normally take a long time to put together. And I can make the agents do things for me, like help that employee create a development plan, or the manager create a coaching script to make sure that employees optimized. I can see the clash, if there's any, between individual company and team OKRs or KPIs or MBOs or whatever. I can also identify who's best for a tiger team for some project that we're doing. That's what's exciting. It's leveraging all of that data in those isolated systems in one place with the help of AI to, at least at the very least, because I know a lot of people get squeamish, like, it's not completely hands-off AI. It's, will it help to surface insights that will make me a better business person, a better HR person, and make it more effective faster than if I had to do the same thing by myself manually?
Yeah. That idea of aggregating disparate data sources about individual team members and whatnot, and just being able to mine that data in a way that, in natural language, presumably, that is so fast and so contextually oriented, it feels like it's so powerful, right?
Well, and again,
And
that's why people get scared too, right? Because if you look at the recruiting side, and that's probably number one where you start to see all of the rancor out there, right? Like, oh, AI is, and I say, well, again, remember back there, this has always happened though. So back in the early internet days, that's the, people don't always remember. That's where all this whole keyword thing came from, right? So there was a time where people would jam the top of their, what normally would be your professional summary section, they would jam that with like 50 keywords because they were worried that the tool, the technology, was going to scan that first before looking at anything else. And so they're thinking the same thing with AI, that AI is this sort of, what's different, that was a discretely programmed type of thing. AI isn't that naive, where it's only going to pick up a few keywords and then surface you with a percent match and whatever. It's a little bit more sophisticated than that. But the challenge becomes like software development. So in the early days, the programming languages and things, there were no libraries. There were very few libraries in the early days. So
yeah,
people who are, 80s, 90s for engineers, they had to go through a practice and education that's a little bit different than now, where you've got tons and tons of code libraries where you can stitch something together and still really not appreciate or understand the code. So I think that's where people get concerned on the recruiting side, is that you're going to let an AI give more control and forget or completely leave out these nuances. But that's assuming two things: A, that the AI is trained poorly, and that the recruiter wants a hands-off experience, which most don't. So do they want some help, some efficiency? Yes. And so I think we just have to be a little bit sober about some of these concerns and where things are. But yes, also mindful that as reasoning and other models start to grow with AI, and as you start using these tools over time, and after 1 year of hiring, will it be trained to know a lot better of what worked and what didn't, et cetera? Yeah, right? But it still needs to be that kind of two in the seat. Make the technology work, help you with those efficiencies, but you still need the human nuance part to make sure that, again, from a recruiting perspective, you're getting the right people in the door.
yeah, totally. When you mentioned the keyword thing, that is still a very common area of misunderstanding on the part of job seekers. And I see it all the time where they're putting in just a flood of keywords thinking that, that there's some primitive keyword program that's looking at resumes for keywords. But to your point, AI is smarter than that now and can take those keywords. They can take a resume within context and provide a better sense of, whether the resume is a fit or not. But I'd love to talk a little bit more about sort of this notion of agents, right? Many of our audience members may not have a clear sense of what an agent is, and I think it is a bit of a term that has yet to be commonly defined. And would love to kind of hear your thoughts on what an agent is, what is its role and evolution. How do you see that evolving and becoming more, I guess, prevalent within organizations? And what is its role too with respect to HR?
Yeah. Well, yeah, an agent, like the agent in the Matrix almost, right? I think this is where a lot of people get confused, because an agent is it's executing an action. Like, for example, if it's taking data from payroll and it's moving it somewhere else, and there's like maybe some decision matrix there, like that though is the workflow of an agent, versus a bot, which is just simply presenting information. It's grabbing it, it's presenting it. And then obviously with generative, there might be some kind of back and forth. But you go from a bot to an agent. So for example, if I say, hey, I want to know what the US vacation policy is. Okay, so the bot can deliver you that information. Here it is. When you go from there to say, well, now I want you to pull up my current balance. I want to submit the PTO. I wanted to send it to my manager for approval. It gets approved. It goes to payroll. All that action an agent would do. So from an HR perspective, think about how many workflows, how many use cases you have a body in between those things that the agent could just do. This is the rise of, I would say, both increased self-service and increased personalization. So if I have, a bot can help me think about myself or do whatever, and it doesn't do anything. It's just talking with me.
Yeah.
Okay. But I could take that a step further and say, if I'm hooked up to, like, say, the LMS, so I can say, okay, well, now I want you to enroll me in these courses. I want you to put this on my calendar. I want you to set up a one-on-one. I want you to identify a mentor in the organization for me. Now it's going and doing all these things. This is where the truth is HR teams are going to get leaner. That's my prediction. Because if you take all those actions that an L&D person would do, an HRBP might do, a generalist might do, and self-service it through all of that, either, again, data warehouse, or it's all there, or it's connecting between systems or whatever, however you set up your setup. Okay, so now the humans that are left, they should be able to have more impact, honestly, because they have this stuff that's kind of going on, but behind the scenes, you can say, okay, what's going on? What is the master agent above all of these saying about behavior, momentum, morale? So let's turn those things. Don't get downtrodden that it's like, oh, I no longer get to be the person who has to flip the switch in the LMS to connect somebody over here to create a development plan. That's low impact. The high impact is, I see all this activity, all this behavior. What are people doing? Why are they moving their career path this way? Okay, I'm starting to get a signal that I've got a group of people who are either unhappy or they feel like their role is changing. So now they're looking for new skill sets, etc. That's the handshake between the person and the agent. So I think that that's how people should look at, I'm going to utilize this to my advantage to do my job better. But yes, we can't ignore the fact that at the pace of this technology, you're going to need leaner HR teams. You're not going to need to have the same organizational structure as we've always had.
And it sounds like, because as these technologies get smarter, as these agents start to emerge, these agents will be, they'll start taking on these tasks, and they'll start executing on these processes that traditionally human team members were doing, sounds like.
Yes.
Yeah. And so what, in your mind, sort of taking that, maybe not to its entire logical conclusion, but at least a few steps forward, what does that mean for how a person should think about the scope of their role? And my understanding, based on what I've seen, people that I've talked to, there's been this, the market has evolved over the years to value specialization, right? And I believe it's going back to, like, the pendulum is swinging the other way, where the market is starting to value more generalization, particularly in light of these AI technologies. I just want to see what your thoughts are on that, and then what do you see as the evolution of the organization and of specific roles in general?
Yeah. Well, it's true, right? HR isn't the only, profile in the organization that can get leaner with properly planned, properly, implemented new technologies. But I think number one is the mindset shift. I think that there's going to be less luxury in not really critically evaluating experience, how that translates to a workflow, what data supports that for whatever you're trying to do at the end of the day, right? So I think that is where you start, and then you start to think, well, I need to evolve my job. Do I need to become an AI expert in HR? Well, no. But at this point in time, you absolutely need to understand the differences, what it can or can't do, what the different models are out there, because that's going to impact how you think about redesigning your tech stack to create more self-service, to create more personalization, to create less sort of headcount, within your group. But as I said, everybody should be doing that. Marketing, sales, right?
Yeah.
We see the evolution of those fully AI SDRs, right? That's a thing. You're seeing that on the support side too. So everybody's in the same boat. It's just that from an HR perspective, it gets more nuanced because we are responsible for all of these things: recruiting, learning, talent engagement, manager enable. Like, it's all of these things that each require a different thought process of a workflow. So if you have the right mindset, you have some basic understanding of what a workflow is, how AI does that, how it works, how do my systems work, what data do I want out of it, right? Then you could be a generalist and get to the same end. But I don't think you can completely sit on generalist only. I think there's still room for the specialist, because one person, even with the best AI tool, isn't going to, let's say HR generalist, isn't going to know all the frameworks and ways to look around corners that a specialist in OD or a specialist in L&D knows. So will they converge? Sure. Will it start to whittle it down to, gosh, I only need, to support a 1,000 person company, I only need 5 HR people who are these uber generalists who've had some COE roles? I'm not sure about that, right?
Yeah.
Again, it really depends. If we see a lot of consolidation in the markets, a lot of these smaller startups get gobbled up by bigger companies and so on, like, okay, maybe. But what I see more is the industries of AI. There's going to be the L&D version, the recruiting one. Like, there's going to be like those sort of swim lanes where they've perfected all of the AIs that they need within that topic area. And then we start to see a broader, okay, how do we connect that? Because right now, AI is either on a platform, so like using ChatGPT, that's a platform, versus you build your own model and you're doing everything kind of much more piecemeal. So that has to evolve as well. But I still say, ultimately, if there's anything people can do today, is understand your workflows, understand your use cases, and blow it up and say, if I had to do it differently and I had this working the way I had, I think it can work, here's what it would look like, here's where it would change. Again, coming back to what is the impact on the business and how does it benefit the people? That is the biggest tool people can think about now.
Yeah. So I guess from a practical perspective, Tony, is I think, if I'm someone in that's 15, maybe 20 years experience in my craft, be it product management, software engineering, marketing, whatever, what you're saying is that I should start to get good at examining what my processes are for creating, let's say, deliverables or outputs, and try to reimagine how AI might be able to help me with that, and maybe start to implement some of these things so that I don't have to do as much of that work. Is that a fair sort of approach?
Yeah. Well, look at the consolidation of what was called the typing pool. So back in the day, you had people at typewriters, and then computers and word processing and all that stuff started to come. That got consolidated. There's no typing pool anymore. So we've seen examples where technology can completely change a segment of a workforce, and I think nobody would argue that still having mechanical typewriters is better with the the information flow that we have. But this is the same thing now. So we are now an advanced technology, society where the speed and the amount and volume of data just can't be handled the way it's always been handled. And you need to be able to have faster synthesis of that information, leading to insights to give you good decisions. So that's how you have to think about it. So if you're not prepared to say, like, well, if I were to break things down and build things back up, what would that look like? And I think for a lot of people, getting past go on, I don't even have an AI bot, policy bot. I don't even know how that works. Okay, well, you need to get past that pretty fast, because that's where it's beginning, right? So the two areas that we see: recruiting, we know it's this concern that it's sourcing resumes of candidates and making a decision. And then policy bots. So a lot of people, like, that's where they're at. What I'm talking about with this, Uber agent army that, can look across everything and signals and a holistic person, like, people see like, oh, that's too far out there. I mean, it's not, okay. It can be done now because I've done it. So I know it can be done, but it's more just, again, don't worry about how this Don't get fixated on replacement, and think of collaboration, think of connective tissue, think of cohesion, but don't lose your main focus, which is your role in the people game is to help create an environment that leads to sustainable execution and impact. That's always the mandate, okay? So as long as you keep your sights on that and then start to walk back into how would I do it differently, familiarize yourself with some tools, you'll be fine. Because at the end of the day, we're still, how many people have reached out and I've advised on startups in AI for people? There's a lot. There's a lot. Plus independents who are building their own things.
Yeah.
So you need to be at minimum able to discern the difference between this is a not well developed tool that has some nice wrapping paper on it versus something that's robust, well thought through, good code, compliant, all of that, and it's ready for prime time, and I could use it in the solution that I've mapped out for my company. That's the way to go.
And so Tony, talk a little bit about, you're in the mix here. I mean, you're in the middle of a lot of this transformation that's going on, and I know that you see sort of the connection between the technology as well as the organization or sort of human aspect to this. As a person out there that is looking to stay relevant in their career and or willing to adapt or reinvent themselves, whether that's going from an employee to a solopreneur, what are sort of the key skills and competencies that are going to be increasingly valuable over time that you're starting to see?
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, anything within the AI world is going to be key. And that can be knowing the nitty gritty, or it can be, I know what platforms are good, or I know what platforms I could apply to this versus to that. So in that sense, to me, it's not that different than you would do today. Like for instance, an HRIS solution, how do you go about doing that? How do you evaluate that? Well, you have your needs analysis, you do an RFP, et cetera, but so it's the same. So being good at understanding, what is out there, what is it, a platform solution, is it niche? So to me, it's the same as it is already. It's just that you have AI is now the new term that you use. But I would say because of that, if you're a non-business focused HR, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, we should always be HR business focused. Like a lot of people aren't. Okay. So if you think about the organization of the future, remote's not going away. I mean, yes, we'll probably see in the next few years more of this, back to reality of being on site 5 days a week and everything else. But you also have to keep in mind there are graduating classes that have come out over the last 5 years that have never known coming to work. So what about that? How are you going to create a policy or an environment where you have to get remote people who've never known coming in ever, right? To be engaged and to have opportunity and to grow and to whatever. That's a much different strategy than the old days where there was a handful of people that were remote, or you worked in technical environments. You've always had remote teams internationally, right? But so that's a new reality. So how do I create that organization where everybody still has the same cohesiveness? How is AI going to help me with that? Where it's always on, it's providing self-service, personalized service. It's helping managers, helping employees, create that cohesion as all the normal things of a business continue. Pivots with the customer, go-to-market strategy, all that stays the same. But the way in which we manage and address and step up to those changes in the business, those are the things that you need to be more aware of. So I would absolutely say, starting today, drop any notion that things are going to continue to look like they've always done. You're going to have a certain HR set of purchases. I need a certain amount of headcount in HR to sustain those services. Like all of that needs to be completely blown up. And I need to be somewhat technical, business focused, but always in the pursuit of, I see the future looking like this. And the one thing I would say on HR is, I'm afraid in some cases that the business will have to knock HR over the head to start to really dig into these things. Oftentimes it becomes a cost issue. We have to take costs out of the organization, and then you start to consolidate or do different things. So let's not do that. Let's be proactive. Let's be in front of it. Because if the business has to define to you your tech strategy, your tech to people strategy, it diminishes a bit the point of having HR or the point of having a good set of folks who understand the people strategy. So don't be that. Lead the way, drive, but you have to get some new tools under your belt and some new thinking about what the future of the org could be, again, in HR and everywhere else. So that's what I think the main focus would be. And then, of course, we'll see what skills and things evolve from there. One thing I will say, people don't have to be afraid of. You don't have to be afraid like you have to actually learn language models in like depth. Like that you won't need to do. You know, tools like Built, Lovable, all these no code platforms. I use them. I use them for mockups. They're great. So now
Yeah.
I don't have to struggle with a PowerPoint and like a whiteboard. Just put your idea, put your prompt. I want to do this, 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 and this. You just become so much more forward savvy that you tried it. Most of them are free. And you can now go to your business owner and say, here's kind of what I'm thinking, right?
Yeah.
That's great. So I just think a lot more of that is really what needs to be done today.
So just to build on that a little bit, so if I'm a person that I'm working my organization and I use ChatGPT, I know how to prompt, maybe I know how to create a custom GPT. How do I take it to the next level in that mindset of, okay, how can I really put this to work for me in maybe more of an automated way that it could start owning, so to speak, certain processes that I would normally have to do manually? What would be the next step for me in terms of any tools that you'd recommend
Yeah.
or platforms you'd recommend? Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, look, part of why I emphasize so much what do you want to do, what do you got today, everything else is because you may end up working with a consultant that's going to do all of the heavy lifting of the technical side, right? So if you're savvy and you can explain yourself and you got a vision, then you won't get, bamboozled by, somebody who's trying to throw you off with all these terms. That's why it's so critical, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of these platforms, so obviously Google has, Gemini, Microsoft has Copilot. So some of these organizations where we're a Microsoft house or we're a Google house, right? They may feed into those platforms which have native built workflows and things in them where you can start to, map that out. ChatGPT Enterprise, obviously you have the security. There's a few more things you have to build out, even with their studio product. Now, there's still a few things you'd have to do and probably get help from IT or somebody on to create connections, say, between Slack or other things.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't want to overlook the fact that, yeah, of course, there's a huge compliance, data security, data privacy piece to a lot of this, right? APIs can do only so much, right? If we're going to start to pull AI in to some of these areas, you have to be mindful of that. That's why, again, mapping is so critical because GDPR, things like that are very important. So some people may feel more comfortable with a platform-driven thing like what Google and Microsoft and others have versus getting some independent contractor who's going to come in and build their model, store it in the cloud, and start doing all these stitching together of things, right? So I think that you just have to be aware of what you're trying to do and then make that solution. There's a lot of people now that are AI consultants that have a whole army of people that can help you with this stuff,
Yeah.
platform or otherwise. So that's really what I would do. I don't think you need to be heroic, in the sense that, like, so for example, if you wanted to build a workflow with something like Make, so you could build a workflow, and if you have all the API keys, right? But most HR people aren't going to have that. They're not going to have all of the secure enterprise coded access. IT
Yeah.
usually drives that, or it might sit in software engineering. So you're not going to get away with it on your own anyway. Basic GPTs that, you can do on your own, sure. But to your point, it works in certain environments, but when you start to get into that complexity of connecting into bigger systems, you'll probably need help. So you can mock it up, you can say, here's what I want to do, and then go find the people who help, put it in place.
Yeah.
I view myself as that way. I'm not trying to be a coder, even though there are all these no code platforms. At the end of the day, no matter how much you love these tools, I would never, and nobody would ever do that, go from, oh, look, Tony built this thing, and now we're going to production deploy it in the enterprise. Like, no way, right? It has to be audited. It has all these steps it has to take. But boy, think how much faster I got to the solution because I spent a little bit of time playing with these tools, most of which are a chat GPT like interface, and it's doing something for you. So it's not hard to get into, but take that time, educate yourself, give it a try, because then when you deliver the solution or you put your ask on the table, it's already that much further along. That's really what I think is key here.
Yeah. I've also found that as people start to play with these technologies, it just starts to capture their imagination in terms of what's possible.
Yes.
And you start coupling that insight or that understanding of what the technology is capable of, what it's not yet capable of, and like what its limits are, and then they start to couple that with like domain expertise and understanding about what some of the challenges and problems and processes are. Then that combination, it seems really powerful. Whether they build that themselves or they rely on guiding a consultant to implement that, but
Yeah.
that insight between the domain side and the AI side in terms of what's possible really seems to create some innovative kinds of applications
Yeah.
of how the
And
technology can be
risks,
applied.
right? I
Yeah,
mean, we have to be mindful, and I am very mindful. I mean, all this sounds great, but I can hear somebody, in the audience saying, yeah, but, what about privacy? What about, I don't want to participate. I don't want my profile. I don't want all this information, right? I don't want to take this or that. Or does the company have a right to take all of the standard stuff, performance review, things like that, and turn it into some sort of decision matrix about my employment, my promotability, all those things, right? Yeah, I mean, those are important. But then I say to myself, or I tell people, so when an HRBP pulls that together in a spreadsheet, it's the difference,
what's the difference?
right? All I'm doing is I'm having AI get it to me faster. But I 100% agree. Do not misunderstand that it's, AI free for all. Like, I'm just going to program this workflow and AI hands off. Well, no, no, no. You still need to have human intervention. And I would suspect if you look at a lot of country laws, even to a large degree in the US, that's going to need to be the case. If we put together, say, a disparate impact analysis or things like that, you make decisions on people, especially to terminate them. Legal, all these people, you would never go to them and say, oh, AI took care of it. We're fine with the list. So no
Yeah,
way. So we have to think about the efficiency piece first. Whatever it is that you built, whatever it's pulling together, whatever thing you're trying to do with, there still has to be that human intervention because, yeah, AI is not infallible. I mean, it'll hallucinate less and less over time. And obviously, every organization that trains their data over and over and over and over again, their instance of the AI, whatever it's doing, is going to get better and better and better.
yeah,
But you still need to have that sort of interface just because, well, ethically it's the right thing to do, but also you have to be mindful that you're not trying to have the technology for this kind of stuff that we're talking about take it all over. But can we improve some things around self-service? Yes. Can we create better experiences for people and better insights? Yes, but managed through the lens of the human piece, not all I'm trying to do is program something and then let it go in the wild and, kind of wipe my hands of it. That's why on the whole jobs thing, yes, you have to be more discerning. Yes, that will lead to leaner teams, but it's still that handshake between the tech and the human.
yeah. Yeah. You mentioned something a minute ago about, just these companies and organizations having maybe a higher fidelity. You didn't use the word higher fidelity, but having a higher fidelity picture and maybe a holistic and less fragmented picture of who you are as a team member. Because now with the rising tide of this AI getting better, it's getting better at mining and drawing insights and connecting the dots out of existing data sources. But I think as time goes on, it'll start to be able to get signal from other sources that before it was just not cost effective or kind of cumbersome.
Yeah.
I think about like Slack, right? You think about a company's sort of Slack workspace. There is so much insight that I think could be mined out of those interactions, even at a holistic macro organizational level. Tell me what this culture is about, right? Even down to the individual. Like, who is this person interacting with? How do they interact with these people? Do they interact in a different way? Are more conversations? Why are people interacting with this person? Is this person a linchpin where everybody's trying to come to this person asking whatever technical questions? That might those insights might factor into how that person might get promoted or be prioritized in terms of their relative value. And it could also give you insight into the people that are maybe not as engaged
Yeah.
right? And that's just from Slack.
Yeah, and the good thing is, like, a lot of those tools exist where
Yeah.
they look at calendar, they look at
Mhm.
email exchanges. Again, you have to be careful, and a lot of that was before AI the way we think of AI now. I mean, it's machine
Yeah.
learning, it's that kind of stuff. But what AI is going to introduce into that, to your point, right, is, again, if we can do it correctly, do it ethically, make sense, all that. Now I can take all that standard information, performance goal, what JD you were hired against, your resume, all that stuff, with those interactions. So to see, where are these synergies, where are they not? I tend to look at the positive that can come from that, right? Yes, of course, there's a dark side it's manipulated purely for the sake of getting rid of people. I get the concern. But I think by and large, people are looking for the positive. We hired you, we made an investment with you. Now we can help to optimize you, because it is distracting and expensive and a pain when you have to turn over people and start over and do all these things. Boy, if I can take the cost and waste of that out and say, hey, Joe was drifting, but looking across all these things, I know why Joe was drifting. And now I can go to him and his manager and say, here's what we're going to do instead. That's
Yeah.
the message that I want to see happen more. But we always lacked that data, or it was a gut thing, or we suspected, or is the manager bad and Joe is fine?
And in some of those
Is the
cases, it's just
environment or
too.
process they're in
Yeah.
flawed? And that's
Yeah.
why Joe has become less productive so that is where it's going. So those people analytics and talent insights, absolutely is going to go and leverage what does exist today to something even more robust.
It seems like it's going to be very powerful. And to your point, sort of attribution towards business objectives, right? If you can attribute that to at an organizational or departmental or even individual level, what everyone's contribution is to the overall moving the needle, right? Because a lot of that it's challenging, and a lot of it just comes down to a gut feel based on a hiring manager's intermittent observations about an individual. And
Yeah.
that's how the person gets promoted or incentivized. Now you're almost delegating a lot of that to maybe an agent that can help inform a human in the loop that can make those, decisions. But the attribution, it feels like it's going to be just a source of new insights that allows, leaders um, to your point, to optimize the teams, the organizations, and even at the individual level, right? To
Yeah.
invest in folks to either retool them or whatnot. So it seems like there's a lot of power there, and I'm really excited to see what comes of it over the next few months, few years.
Yeah. No,
It's uh, it's
we'll be in a different place. One sort of note here that I always remember in some of these smaller companies I've worked in is they'll say, we don't know what changed. Everybody knew each other, and then we got to 100 people and started to change a little bit, and then at 250 it changed a lot, and then we went through another round of funding, and you kind of get like these perplexed, what happened, and sort of like the people who formed the company or the legacy side with the new side, like, why do we keep running into these problems? Like, don't we know better? Don't we have decades of, experience how to prevent that? And of course, a lot of this is subtle. You're cranking, you're working, you don't really see it happening. Imagine now if you have a way to monitor that, like you start to see things surface to you that you may have missed, or you didn't think to look at, or you didn't see that there was a correlation between
yeah,
this department's goals going off the rails and why this group was fine, but now is having problems. I never knew that there was a connection, right? The ability to now start to think like, well, no, I can see those subtleties start to rise and address them faster so that we don't get into these own movements of typical startups where they just crash. Now they have to fire everybody and hire a whole new set of leaders. Like,
yeah.
that was a series of things that led to the need to do that. Gosh, that's expensive. It's a huge time waste. It's massively disruptive to the culture and morale. If we
Well,
can get in front of that, and I don't just mean HR, but everybody, if we can get in front of that at an individual level all the way to the top and steer around those things or nip them in the bud when it comes, that is exciting to me. And that's super powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Not there yet, but we'll get there. Tony, thank you so much for spending time with me here. I look forward to doing this again. As things are moving so fast. And how can folks in our audience best connect with you?
Well, for sure, connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can go to my website, www.tonydeblauwe.com, and connect with me that way as well.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Tony. It was a pleasure getting to know you better and kind of sharing your vision for what's going on out there. I think these insights will help a lot of us, including myself, get a better sense of which way is up. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Eric.